Sacred Heart Hospital in Denver hums with fluorescent lights and the antiseptic smell that clings to scrubs like a second skin. 5:47 in the morning. The sky outside the ICU windows is still black, indifferent to the lives being monitored inside. Megan O'Brien arrives 15 minutes early, the way she always does, moving through the hallways with the kind of quiet efficiency that goes unnoticed until something goes wrong and she's the one holding it together. 3 years. 1,095 days without incident. Without question. Without anyone asking why her sutures looked more like architectural precision than nursing, why her hands moved with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who had held other people's lives together in worse places than Denver. The ICU nurses know her name. They don't know her rank. She checks the assignment board. For patients. Bay 7, post-op cardiac. Bay 9, pneumonia, day 3 antibiotics. Bay 11, diabetic ketoacidosis, insulin pump malfunction. Bay 13, the new admission from county, unconscious, facial trauma, transferred at midnight. She exhales. Routine. Everything is routine. The locker room is empty except for the hum of the refrigerator tucked in the corner and the tick-tick-tick of the wall clock. Megan hangs her jacket on the third hook from the left, the same spot every shift. The lining catches the fluorescent light for half a second, a faded Special Forces unit patch, the airborne tab barely visible under the frayed edges. She stares at it for exactly 2 seconds. Then the lining folds closed again. Hidden. The way it's been for 18 years. She pulls on her scrubs. Navy blue. No embroidery. No personality. The stethoscope goes around her neck with the same ritualistic precision she uses for everything else. Her badge clipped to the pocket. Her watch, the basic white Timex, nothing expensive, nothing memorable. Her hands are clean. Her fingernails are cut short. Her hair is pulled back. She is invisible. She has learned how to be invisible. The 6 a.m. shift starts with the morning huddle. 12 nurses, 3 residents, 1 attending physician. Dr. Hargrove stands at the head of the conference table, his pressed white coat catching the light like a flag of surrender that nobody waved. Tall. Silver at the temples. The kind of handsome that comes with a trust fund and the certainty that the world bends toward him because it always has. Megan sits in the back row. She listens to report on the 4 patients. Vitals stable. Pain management adequate. Nothing critical. Nothing that requires intervention. Nothing that requires her to be anything more than present. Until rounds. The attendings move through the ICU at 7:15 a.m., and Megan trails 2 steps behind as the nurse's assignment dictates. Bay 7 first, post-op cardiac, 48 hours since bypass surgery. The monitor beeps its steady rhythm. EKG pattern normal. Oxygen saturation 97%. Dr. Hargrove leans over the patient's chart, making notes in his precise, controlled handwriting. The resident stands opposite him, nervous the way first-year residents always are, eyes too wide, hoping not to be asked anything he doesn't know. Megan watches the numbers. BP 118/74. Heart rate 78. The oxygen is climbing, 98% now. She watches the fall line. The medication drips are running at correct rates. The patient's color is good. Pink lips. Pink fingernails. Good perfusion. Everything is textbook. Everything is fine. Except the medication drip. Dr. Hargrove is writing an order. His hand moves across the chart. The dose is wrong. Not catastrophically. Not dangerously. But wrong. The medication is digoxin, a cardiac glycoside that works on a razor's edge. Too much causes toxicity. Too little fails to regulate the heart's rhythm. He's ordered 0.5 milligrams. The post-op cardiac protocol at Sacred Heart specifies 0.375 milligrams for this patient's weight and renal function. Megan's hands are calm. Her face is calm. Inside, something shifts, the automatic calculation of risk, the immediate memory of what happens when dosages are wrong. She has seen it before. She has held people together through it before. She does not want to see it again. The resident stands silent, waiting for confirmation. The attending has spoken, so the attending is correct. This is how it works. This is how the hierarchy functions. The attending makes orders. The resident follows. The nurse executes. The patient is saved or isn't. Nobody questions the structure. Megan steps forward. One step. Just one. Her voice is steady. Deferential. Excuse me, Dr. Hargrove. The protocol for post-op cardiac dosing at this patient's weight is 0.375 milligrams. His creatinine clearance is 62 milliliters per minute. This patient presents as renal compromise. The room stops breathing. Dr. Hargrove's pen pauses over the chart. He doesn't look up. He doesn't speak. He turns the page of the chart toward him like he's reading it for the first time, like he hasn't been reviewing this patient's entire medical history for the last 90 seconds. 30 seconds pass. 40. The resident's jaw tightens. The other nurses exchange glances, quick, quiet, careful glances that say nothing. When Dr. Hargrove speaks, his voice is level. Calm. Like a man discussing the weather. Thank you for your input, Megan. I'll adjust the order. He crosses out the 0.5 with 3 precise strokes and writes 0.375 below it. His signature is a work of art, looping and confident and utterly untouchable. He clips the pen to his coat pocket. He still hasn't looked at her. Let's move to Bay 9. The group moves. The resident trails behind Dr. Hargrove. The other nurses disperse to their assignments. Megan stands for a moment longer beside the patient's bed. The monitor beeps. She doesn't move. She counts the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Her hands are steady. Her breathing is steady. The trembling isn't fear. It's restraint. She follows the group to Bay 9. The pneumonia patient. 84 years old. 3 days of 4 antibiotics. Fever is down. O2 sat is stable. The patient is improving. Dr. Hargrove asks the standard questions. The resident answers. Megan listens from her position 2 steps back. Nothing is wrong here. The orders are correct. The care is appropriate. She could disappear and the patient would be fine. But in the corner of the ICU, behind the glass partition of Bay 13, she sees Dr. Hargrove's reflection watching her. Not the patient. Not the resident. Her. Bays 10 and 11 pass without incident. Routine orders. Routine care. The kind of shifts that are supposed to end without drama. But rounds finish at 8:15 a.m., and Dr. Hargrove's jaw is a line of compressed frustration. His silver temples catch the fluorescent light. His hands are in his pockets. He walks past the nurse's station without making eye contact with Megan, and somehow, that is worse than if he had stopped to speak. The shift continues. 8 hours of quiet precision. Megan checks vitals at the appointed times. She documents everything in the electronic medical record with the clinical accuracy of someone who has written incident reports that disappear into classified file cabinets. She changes dressings. She adjusts 4 rates. She speaks to one patient whose pain medication needs adjustment. She does not speak to anyone about the moment in Bay 7. At 2 p.m., during the shift change, one of the nurses, Sarah, who has been kind since Megan arrived 3 years ago, lingers near her locker. That was brave. What you said to Hargrove. Most people wouldn't. Megan removes her stethoscope. Rolls it carefully. Places it in the locker's side pocket. Her hands are steady. Her voice is even. The dosage was wrong. He won't forget that. Then I'll have to live with it. Sarah leaves. The locker room is silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the tick-tick-tick of the wall clock. Megan reaches for her jacket. The lining is visible for a moment, that faded patch, the airborne tab, 18 years of silence sewn into the fabric. She folds the lining carefully, tucks it closed. Nobody sees it. Nobody needs to see it. Nobody needs to know that there are 11 other names on that patch. Nobody needs to know that one of them is marked with a date she doesn't speak about. Nobody needs to know that 18 years ago, she held a defensive perimeter against an enemy that didn't wear uniforms, kept 150 troops breathing when the sand was hot enough to cook metal, made a decision that got classified so deep that Pentagon lawyers made records disappear. She was ordered to disappear after that operation. Senior Chief Petty Officer Megan O'Brien was told to become someone else. To become nobody. To fold away the part of her life that mattered and wear invisibility like armor. She had done it. 3 years at Sacred Heart. 1,500 quiet shifts. Hands that could read vital signs before machines could quantify them. Hands that could start and for in a moving ambulance. Hands that remembered how to work under fire, which meant working under any pressure. All of it invisible. All of it beneath notice. Until she corrected Dr. Hargrove's mathematics. The drive home takes 23 minutes. Megan's car is a 2011 Honda Civic. Modest. Unremarkable. A vehicle that doesn't draw attention. She drives the speed limit. She uses her turn signals. She obeys every law because she learned a long time ago that breaking small rules leads to scrutiny, and scrutiny leads to exposure, and exposure leads to the kind of conversation she cannot have with anyone except her 14-year-old daughter, who knows only that her mother works at the hospital and sometimes wakes up from dreams that don't have names. Her daughter, Emma, is waiting on the porch when Megan pulls into the driveway. Homework spread across the steps. Backpack open. The casual entropy of a teenager who doesn't understand how fragile order really is. How was work? Fine. Just fine. Yes. Emma studies her mother's face with the precision of someone who learned to read the smallest shifts in expression. The nearly imperceptible change in jaw tension. The barely visible tightening around the eyes. Did something happen? Megan sits beside her daughter. She doesn't speak. Sometimes silence is the most honest answer. Emma doesn't ask again. She knows her mother well enough to know when questions are unwelcome. Instead, she leans against her mother's shoulder. They sit on the porch in the Denver afternoon, watching the street, not speaking. The sun moves behind the mountains. The light changes. The day doesn't end, it just becomes evening, the way things always transform if you wait long enough. At 7 p.m., Megan's work phone buzzes. A text from the hospital. Nothing urgent. Just a reminder about staff orientation tomorrow. Nothing that should carry weight. Nothing that should mean anything. She sets the phone down and doesn't look at it again. She doesn't know that Dr. Hargrove is already making his first phone call. She doesn't know that he's already accessing the staff files, looking for something, anything, he can leverage against her. She doesn't know that her 18 years of silence is about to be tested in ways she hasn't prepared for. She doesn't know that the next 72 hours will unwrap everything she has hidden. She knows only that she corrected his mathematics, and in doing so, she has marked herself. The next morning, room 512 falls silent when Dr. Hargrove enters. Megan is at the bedside preparing the four-cart, her hands moving through the familiar choreography, alcohol wipes, tourniquet, saline flush in the correct order. The patient is an elderly man recovering from a minor stroke, and his 3 adult children sit in the corner, watching the medical theater unfold. They don't know what's about to happen. Neither does Megan. Hargrove stops 5 feet from the cart. His voice comes out measured, almost conversational, but loud enough that the family's heads turn. Nurse O'Brien, I need to observe your basic competence with this simple task. We've had concerns raised. He doesn't specify who raised them. There are no concerns in Megan's file. There have never been concerns. But the family hears the weight in his words, and immediately their eyes shift from trust to doubt. Megan's hands hesitate for exactly 1 second, the only tell she allows herself. The tourniquet tightens around the patient's arm. She reaches for a 20-gauge catheter, her movements deliberate and clean. She doesn't look at Hargrove. She doesn't acknowledge the audience he's assembled. Some nurses plateau early. Hargrove continues, stepping closer. His cologne reaches her before his words do, something expensive that doesn't belong in a hospital room. They confuse routine with excellence. They mistake years of repetition for expertise. The patient's daughter shifts in her seat, uncomfortable. The son crosses his arms. Megan's hand trembles as she reaches for the fall line, not from fear, but from the effort of not moving. The trembling is restraint. The trembling is a cage holding something back. She finds the vein on the first pass. The catheter slides in with the whisper-soft give of perfect placement. No fumbling. No second attempt. She flushes the line, and it flows clear. She secures the tape with the same precision she's used 47 times this week. Perfect. Always perfect. For 3 years, always perfect. Hargrove circles the cart like a man inspecting a crime scene, looking for evidence that doesn't exist. The line is in, "Doctor," Megan says. Her voice is level. Steady. The voice of someone who has inserted thousands of catheters, who has done this in war zones with incoming fire rattling the windows, who has done this in the dark with only the red glow of a combat headlamp. But he doesn't hear that voice. He hears only what he wants to hear, the voice of a woman he's decided is finished. Hargrove dismisses her with a wave, as if she's a junior resident who's just botched an exam. "Thank you, nurse. We'll monitor the situation." He says it like she won't be the one monitoring the situation. Like her hands, which have just performed a perfect procedure in front of 3 witnesses, are suddenly suspect. The family watches her leave. The seed is planted. By tomorrow, they'll mention it to someone. By next week, they'll tell the story differently. The doctor seemed concerned, they'll say. "We weren't sure about the nurse." That's how institutions die. Not in revolutions. In whispers. By Wednesday afternoon, the break room has become a geography of absence. Megan enters at 2:15 p.m., her shift half over, her lunch clutched in a paper bag from home, turkey sandwich, carrot sticks, a thermos of coffee she made at dawn. The room smells like microwaved popcorn and floor cleaner. 3 nurses are gathered near the refrigerator, Jennifer from ICU, Marcus from the step-down unit, and Sarah Chen from day shift, who still has an hour left on her clock. Megan moves toward the empty table, the only seat in the room that's clear. She sat here every day for 3 years. This is where she eats lunch. This is where she reads the same dog-eared copy of a 2019 medical journal she keeps in her locker because reading keeps her hands occupied and her mind from wandering to places she doesn't want it to go. Jennifer sees her first. Then Marcus. Then Sarah. The conversation dies mid-word. Jennifer closes her mouth. The 3 of them exchange a look that lasts approximately 2 seconds, the amount of time it takes to make a decision that isn't really a decision at all, because the decision was made elsewhere, in a closed-door conversation, in a whispered warning from someone whose authority they respect far more than their own conscience. Marcus stands first. His chair scrapes against the tile floor with the harsh sound of betrayal. Jennifer follows, her lunch forgotten. Sarah hesitates for exactly 1 breath, long enough that Megan thinks someone might actually stay, might sit down, might be willing to risk whatever invisible punishment Hargrove has implied would come to anyone who contradicted the narrative. Then Sarah gathers her uneaten yogurt and her phone and leaves. The room is silent except for the refrigerator's compressor kickstarting with a mechanical wheeze. Megan sits down anyway. She unwraps her sandwich. She eats. Her hand trembles as she lifts the coffee thermos, and this time it's not restraint. This time it's the physical cost of being isolated in a place where isolation is a weapon sharper than any blade. She doesn't cry. She doesn't put her head down. She eats her lunch with the same precision she uses to insert full lines, bite by bite, in a room that suddenly feels like it has no oxygen. One of them mutters something on the way to the door. Liability risk, the voice says, loud enough to be heard. Loud enough to be deniable. I heard Hargrove talking about her chart. No one bothers to specify which chart, or what the supposed problem was. The accusation is the point. The specificity would only undermine it. By Thursday morning, the formal write-up appears on the unit board. It's printed on white paper, but someone has outlined it in red marker, not the standard red of the hospital system, but the kind of red you have to deliberately choose. The kind that says this is urgent. This is a problem. This is a warning. It's signed by Hargrove and countersigned by the department head, a woman named Patricia Torres who hasn't worked a floor shift in 6 years and who relies entirely on Hargrove's interpretations of patient care. The document cites 3 protocol violations from charts Megan never touched. Medication error, 10/15, 2:30 a.m., patient administered digoxin when Lasix was ordered. Megan's shift was 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. She wasn't in the hospital at 2:30 a.m. Incomplete vital signs documentation on the 22nd of October, 3:15 a.m. Same shift. Same timeline. Same impossibility. Failure to report critical lab value within protocol timeframe, 10/8, overnight shift. Megan hasn't worked overnight in 3 months. The protocol violations are lies. Deliberate, verifiable, specific lies. But they're typed in the hospital's official font, on the hospital's official letterhead, signed by 2 people whose names carry weight. The lies have infrastructure now. They have authority. And authority, Megan is learning, doesn't require evidence. Authority just requires volume and the right messenger. She reads it once, standing in the break room, while 2 nurses pretend not to watch her read it. She doesn't cry. She doesn't speak. She removes her shift notes from her locker and walks back onto the floor, her badge still clipped to her pocket, still allowing her access, still proclaiming her as belonging here. For now. By mid-morning, Hargrove walks past her station in the hallway. He's walking with Dr. Marcus Chen, a resident who's been at Sacred Heart for 6 weeks and who still believes in the hierarchy, who still thinks that if a senior physician says something, it must be grounded in fact. Hargrove's voice carries down the corridor, exactly as loud as he needs it to be. Some people aren't cut out for real medicine, he says. He doesn't say her name, but they're walking directly past her, directly past the nurse's station where she's reviewing a patient's medication reconciliation. The emergency department is not a place for mediocrity. It's not a place for nurses who can't maintain basic protocols. He pauses. The ER saves lives. That's the entire point. The resident says something in response, agreement, probably, or a laugh, the kind of laugh that solidifies a hierarchy. Hargrove continues walking. In 30 seconds, he's gone. In 30 seconds, he's unmade everything Megan has built. She stops breathing. Not because she can't breathe. Because she's choosing not to, the way you choose not to move when a sniper has you in his scope. The way you choose absolute stillness when movement equals death. She stares at the medication reconciliation in front of her, but the words have become abstract shapes, and her hands are sheets of white paper. One tear escapes. Just one. Not from sadness or fear or any of the emotions Hargrove is trying to trigger. It's from something else. Something older. Something that's been locked in a cage for 18 years, something that used to move through the night with a rifle and a set of coordinates and the knowledge that 15 minutes from now, people would either be alive or they wouldn't be, and that reality would depend entirely on decisions made in the next 900 seconds. She wipes the tear without looking at her hand, without breaking eye contact with the hallway where Hargrove has just disappeared. Then she stands up. She turns around. And she raises her voice just enough to carry down the corridor, to the place where he's still within earshot, to the place where the resident is still translating the message into belief. I've kept more people alive than you've ever treated, she says. Her voice doesn't waver. Her voice doesn't crack. Her voice is the voice of someone who has spent 18 years following orders from people who knew exactly who and what she was, and who respected it precisely because she never announced it, never claimed it, never threw it back in anyone's face the way she's throwing it now. It's a breach of protocol. It's insubordinate. It's the first time she's broken character in 3 years, and it will cost her. Hargrove stops walking. The resident stops. The hallway stops. Even the ventilation system seems to pause in its mechanical breathing, and for 3 seconds, there is absolute silence, the kind of silence that only exists in hospitals and churches and other places where the difference between life and death is a whisper. Hargrove turns around. His expression doesn't change. His face is calm, almost pleasant. But his eyes are the color of winter water, and he's smiling in the way a shark smiles, all teeth, no mercy, the smile of something that has been challenged and doesn't appreciate it. "We'll see what the board thinks about that attitude," he says. Then he walks away. The resident follows. The hallway resumes. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead with their endless industrial hum. By evening, the campaign is no longer internal. By evening, there are phone calls being made in a closed office, calls to board members and former colleagues and people who owe Hargrove favors. By evening, he's activated a network that extends far beyond Sacred Heart, a network of authority that will transform a nurse's correction into evidence of instability, a nurse's composure into evidence of arrogance, a nurse's skill into evidence of something dangerous that needs to be contained. But Megan doesn't know this yet. She finishes her shift. She clocks out. She drives home in the rain, the windshield wipers keeping time with the deception that's already begun to spiral beyond anyone's ability to stop it, and she parks in her driveway in Denver as the sun sets in shades of red and orange that look like violence. The Tuesday morning lobby at Sacred Heart was chaos wrapped in fluorescent light. A visiting patient collapsed near the information desk, man in his 60s, skin the color of ash, breathing in short violent gasps that weren't breathing at all. Tracheal deviation. Megan saw it from 30 feet away. The collapse of the right side of his chest. The way his neck veins were distending like blue cords about to snap. Tension pneumothorax. The room around him was doing what rooms do when someone stops functioning, nurses frozen in that half-second paralysis, visitors backing away as if trauma was contagious, the security guard reaching for his radio like it would help. Megan was moving before the thought finished forming. Her legs carried her across the tile floor in a walk that was almost not running. Her hands were already cataloging what she needed. 14-gauge angiocath. Something for a one-way valve. The ballpoint pen from the desk would work, the casing would work. She'd done this before in conditions that would make this lobby look like an operating room at Johns Hopkins. Sand in her hair. Incoming fire from 3 directions. A young corporal whose lung had collapsed because of shrapnel, and she was the only person with hands steady enough to stop him from drowning in his own blood while the mortars came down like God was angry. The patient's eyes were rolling back. His oxygen saturation was somewhere below what kept human beings alive. 60%. 58. The monitor was screaming numbers that meant minutes now, not hours. "Trey," Megan said. Not a question. Not a request. A resident appeared with a sterile field. Megan's hands moved through the preparation without her brain asking permission. Her muscle memory had its own authority, shaped by 18 years of silence and 3 years of pretending to be just another nurse who happened to save lives with unusual precision. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. She found the landmarks on his chest the way her fingers found piano keys. This was how her body spoke when her voice wasn't allowed to. The needle slid in with a whisper of resistance. Subcutaneous fat. Muscle. The pleural space. And then, the hiss. That sound. That specific sound of air escaping under pressure, of a lung re-inflating, of a human being getting a second chance at breathing. The patient's eyes came back. His body went rigid, then soft. O2 sat climbing. 64. 70. 78. "Get me the 1A chest tube," Megan said. Her voice had dropped an octave. She didn't recognize it. It was the voice of someone who'd given orders in conditions where hesitation meant caskets. She was connecting the pen casing as a one-way valve when Dr. Hargrove's voice cut through the lobby like a knife through silk. Not loud. That was the precision of it. He didn't need to yell. He had institutional authority, and he was wielding it like a weapon. "What are you doing?" His presence moved through the crowd toward her. "That's not your patient. That's not your protocol." Megan didn't look up. Her hands continued their work, securing the casing, taping it in place with the kind of efficiency that comes from having done this on a man who was bleeding out, who was dying, who needed her hands to be perfect because perfection was the only thing that would keep him alive. Unauthorized procedure, Hargrove continued, his voice carrying across the lobby in that way voices do when they know they're being heard. "Liability nightmare. You're suspended from patient contact effective immediately. Step away from the bed." The patient's O2 sat was 84 now. 86. Climbing toward something that resembled living. Megan finished the job. She secured the final piece of tape. She stepped back. She turned to Hargrove with her face composed like a scar, still there, still visible, but no longer bleeding. "He was dead," she said. 10 words. Each one exact. "Now he's breathing. You're welcome." The lobby had gone so quiet you could hear the ventilation system cycling through the ceiling vents, that low mechanical whisper that hospitals used to keep themselves alive. No one moved. The patient was breathing. The impossible had happened in plain sight, and no one had the authority to undo it. But Hargrove had other authorities in reserve. Within 1 hour, he was on the phone. 2 board members who owed him referrals that had padded his consulting fees, referrals that had built his reputation as the surgeon other surgeons called when they needed someone with his particular brand of confidence. He didn't ask for favors. He reminded them of obligations. His voice, over the phone, was polite as a scalpel. By 11 a.m., Sacred Heart's compliance department had initiated a formal investigation into Megan O'Brien's credentials and conduct. By noon, Hargrove had contacted her nursing school directly. Not a courtesy call. A request for full credential verification, specifically asking them to look for discrepancies in her background, any gaps in her documentation, anything that might suggest her certifications weren't legitimate. The nursing school administrator found the request unusual. Megan had been a model graduate, exemplary board scores, 0 disciplinary history. But it was a request from a chief surgeon at a major hospital, and you didn't decline those without cause. By 2 p.m., an external investigator was being brought in. Not a nurse. Not someone from Sacred Heart. Someone expensive, someone unconnected, someone whose job was to review every chart Megan had touched in 3 years, every patient she'd assessed, every intervention she'd documented. Not looking for specific violations. Just looking. Hargrove had given him no direction except this: find something. The directive was clear without being stated. Volume would do the work. If you examine 3 years of nursing records with the intent to build a termination case, you can always find something. A notation that's slightly outside standard format. A decision that could be interpreted as overstepping. A pattern that someone with authority could call reckless, even if it looked like excellence to everyone else. The machinery of institutional power was turning now, grinding with the inevitability of stone on stone. Monday morning came grey and flat, the kind of morning that doesn't promise anything. Megan was called to HR at 8 a.m. The director's name was Catherine, and she had worked at Sacred Heart for 11 years. She was competent. She was kind. She was also terrified. Her eyes couldn't meet Megan's. That was the tell. If she believed this was legitimate, if she'd been comfortable with the decision, her eyes would have held steady. Instead, they skittered across the desk, across the folder in front of her, across anything except Megan's face. "We're suspending you pending investigation," Catherine said. Her voice was soft as her apology. Into multiple procedural violations and the unauthorized lobby intervention from Tuesday. Megan didn't respond. She was learning the power of silence. She was learning that words were a privilege and silence was a weapon. Your hospital badge will be deactivated effective immediately, Catherine continued, her words coming faster now, as if speed would make them hurt less. You're not to enter patient care areas. You're not to access any medical records. You're not to. I understand, Megan said. 2 words. They were enough. They walked to the nurse's station together. The day shift was arriving, clocking in, pulling up their patient assignments. 20 eyes tracked Megan as she approached the badge reader. She could feel them. The knowledge that something had shifted. That the invisible nurse was now visibly falling. Hargrove was standing at his office window on the 2nd floor, and he was watching. Megan could feel that too, the weight of his attention, the satisfaction of watching a plan come together like a surgical incision. She scanned her badge one last time. The reader beeped. Access denied. She removed the badge from her lanyard. She placed it on the counter, on the surface where 1,000 nurses had placed 1,000 badges at the end of 1,000 shifts. Hers was just one more piece of plastic. She went to her locker. The locker she'd had for 3 years. She retrieved her jacket, the old one, the one with the faded unit patch sewn inside the lining, the patch that said who she'd been when she was allowed to be someone. She put it on. She walked to the staff exit. She didn't look back. The drive home was made in a kind of clarity that felt like drowning in air. The streets of Denver in early morning. The traffic light rhythm. The way the world kept moving even when your own life had been put on pause. She pulled into her driveway at 1:24 p.m. and sat in the car for 3 minutes, her hands on the steering wheel, her scrub still damp with the sweat of the lobby emergency, still carrying the smell of antiseptic and something else, the smell of her own adrenaline, the chemical signature of fear. She was still in her scrubs when she sat down at the kitchen table. The suspension letter was there in front of her, spread out like an accusation. Pending investigation. Multiple violations. Unauthorized procedures. The words arranged themselves in ways that made her sound dangerous, incompetent, reckless. They didn't mention the patient she'd saved. They didn't mention Tuesday's lobby, the hiss of air, the oxygen saturation climbing. The kitchen was very quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when someone has been living with secrets for 18 years and suddenly those secrets are starting to demand payment in a currency she didn't have. Her daughter came through the front door at 2:23 p.m. School had ended early. Parent-teacher conferences. Megan had forgotten. There were so many things she'd let herself forget, so many normal details of a normal life that her brain had been too busy compartmentalizing to maintain. The backpack hit the floor. Sarah stopped. She was 14, and she could read her mother the way other people read books. She could see when something had broken. Mom. Her voice had that particular quality it got when she was scared. Why are you home early? Is something wrong? The question hung in the kitchen like a hostage situation. Megan could tell her daughter the truth. She could say, I saved someone's life and the hospital fired me for it. She could explain the investigation, the badge, the institutional cruelty of powerful men protecting their territories. She could tell her about the lobby, about the needle decompression, about the patient who was alive because Megan's hands knew how to keep people breathing. But to tell her that would be to explain why. To explain why would be to reach for the jacket hanging on the chair. To reach for the jacket would be to turn it inside out. To turn it inside out would be to show her the unit patch. And to show her the patch would be to open the door to 18 years of questions she couldn't answer, secrets she couldn't share, a version of herself that was supposed to be dead. I saved someone's life, Megan said. Her voice was hollow. And they're punishing me for it. Sarah sat down slowly across from her. She didn't ask more questions. She just sat there, her backpack still on the floor, her mother still in scrubs, the kitchen still very quiet. That evening, a call came through to Sacred Heart's emergency department. Transfer patient incoming from County General. Unconscious. Severe burns. Facial trauma. The interpreter's notes flagged something unusual in his initial assessment: statements the man had made in his fever, statements in broken English about an angel, about a woman with hands that moved like mercy, about a fire in Baghdad and someone pulling him from it. The note said he kept saying the same thing over and over: the ghost. The ghost saved me. Megan didn't know any of this yet. She was at her kitchen table, watching her daughter do homework, pretending everything was normal, pretending she wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop, pretending she didn't recognize the sound of a life spinning toward an ending or a beginning. She couldn't have known that a patient was about to arrive who would see her face and speak a truth that had been buried for 18 years. She couldn't have known that the moment she'd been afraid of for 2 decades was moving toward her like a helicopter crossing a desert, getting closer, getting louder, inevitable. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table in her scrubs at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone white. 14-year-old Emma came through the door with her backpack still on her shoulders, keys in hand, that careful way she moved when she sensed something was wrong. The girl's eyes found her mother's face and widened. "Mom, why are you home early?" Megan opened her mouth. Nothing came out. 18 years of keeping a secret that wasn't hers to tell, a classified operation buried so deep that even her own daughter didn't know her real rank or the scar tissue history written across her left arm. She couldn't answer without breaking the silence. So she didn't. She just looked at her daughter and let Emma wrap her arms around her shoulders, smelling like school cafeteria and that cherry lip balm she bought with her allowance, and Megan closed her eyes and held her daughter like she was the last solid thing in the world. The next morning, the hospital called. Not her supervisor. The ICU director himself, Dr. Chen. "We're short 2 nurses," he said. "Transfer coming from county with a complex case. Your name came up." He didn't say, "We need someone who doesn't flinch." He didn't say, "We need someone who's seen trauma that would destroy a lesser person." He just waited. Megan was suspended. Deactivated. Her badge was a plastic rectangle sitting on her kitchen counter, dead weight. But a patient was coming, and the ICU director was asking. She put on scrubs that weren't hers, borrowed from a friend who worked night shift, and drove to Sacred Heart on a temporary visitor badge that felt like wearing someone else's skin. The patient arrived unconscious from County General on a wheeled stretcher, vitals already unstable. Megan stood in the ICU doorway and watched them transfer him to the hospital bed, moving him with the coordinated efficiency of paramedics who'd seen 1,000 transfers. That's when she saw his face. His left cheek and jawline bore a distinctive burn pattern, a map of scarring that started at the orbital bone and spread downward in a specific configuration. Trauma from an explosion. The kind of injury you don't forget because you'd been standing 15 feet away from the blast when it happened, Baghdad, 2006, trying to apply pressure to a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Her hands went numb. 2 residents stood on either side of the bed, reviewing the transfer paperwork. The patient's chart listed him as Ahmed Hassan, aid worker, stable housing, referred by a non-profit that worked with refugees. No military background. No classification markers. Just another patient with a story nobody was asking for. Megan forced herself to move. To check the monitor. To verify the 4-line running at the correct rate. To do the thing she'd trained herself to do 1,000 times before and make herself invisible in plain sight. Then his eyes opened. They were dark, unfocused at first, then something shifted behind them. Recognition. Slow and certain. His hand moved toward the bed rail, reaching for something solid, and his eyes locked on hers. The room went so quiet you could hear the ventilator's mechanical breath, steady and hypnotic. "Baghdad," he whispered in broken English, his voice like gravel dragged across concrete. "You are the ghost. You pulled me from the fire." The 2 residents turned. One of them asked, "Nurse O'Brien, do you know this patient?" Before she could answer, before she could form words or construct a lie or do any of the things she'd trained herself to do, footsteps echoed in the hallway behind her. Emma stood in the ICU doorway still wearing her school uniform, hair pulled back in a ponytail, eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes when you realize something enormous is happening and you don't understand what it is. Someone from the hospital had called her. A guidance counselor who'd put two and two together, a suspended employee, a personal emergency, a daughter who needed to know. Emma's voice came out steady, louder than her physical size should allow. My mom's a senior chief petty officer. Silence. The kind that lives in hospital rooms when monitors stop beeping and everyone collectively holds their breath. The patient turned his head toward Emma, then back to Megan. His voice dropped lower, barely audible. 150 soldiers. 19 hours. We thought you were dead. They said you were dead. They said all of you were dead. His hand was still reaching, trembling. Your mother held the perimeter. She saved many lives. Emma looked at her mother like she was seeing her for the first time, and Megan realized her daughter was beginning to understand that the woman who'd made her lunch this morning, who'd helped her with algebra homework, who'd cried at the kitchen table 2 days ago, that woman was someone else entirely. Megan reached for his chart with hands that weren't shaking because she didn't allow them to shake. Not here. Not in front of the residents. Not in front of her daughter. But her eyes blurred as she read the transfer notes, the vitals, the medical history. Then the interpreter's addendum: patient states a female American operator saved him and 14 others during classified 2006 incident in Baghdad. Patient claims she held field surgical capability under enemy fire for extended duration. Patient expresses profound gratitude and states operator saved his life when he was civilian combatant and later treated as aid worker to protect his family. The words didn't make sense. The words made perfect sense. The words were written in black ink and they were changing everything in real time, like watching a bomb detonate in slow motion. Dr. Chen stepped into the room. His presence was steady, controlled, the kind of composure that comes from knowing exactly when to move and when to stand still. I'm going to need you in a conference room, he said to Megan. Not a question. A directive. Now. The two residents didn't move. Emma didn't move. The patient's hand finally stopped reaching, and his eyes closed, and the ventilator kept breathing for him while everything Megan had spent 18 years keeping buried began its violent ascent toward the surface. Come on, Emma, Megan said. Her voice had changed. The softness was gone. There was command underneath now, something that came from a different version of herself. We're going to need to sit down for a while. The conference room at Sacred Heart fell silent when Commander Reese walked through the doors. 30 seconds of pure, suffocating quiet. His dress uniform moved like water, navy blue with gold insignia that caught the fluorescent lights. The room's air pressure changed. Every board member straightened. Even the external investigator's pen stopped moving across her legal pad. Senior Chief O'Brien earned 2 silver stars and a Navy Cross, Reese said. His voice carried the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. For an operation you don't have clearance to hear about. Dr. Hargrove's jaw tightened. His fingers gripped the edge of the mahogany table. An FBI liaison stood next to Reese, a woman with dark eyes and a tablet. The operation has been declassified as of this morning, she said flatly. Senior Chief O'Brien held a surgical perimeter for 19 hours under fire. She coordinated medical triage while engaging hostile forces. She saved 150 Special Forces personnel who would have died without her intervention. 150. The number sat in the room like a weight. The hospital CEO's face went pale. The board members exchanged glances. One of them, the radiologist who'd signed off on Hargrove's complaint about Megan's erratic behavior, set down her coffee cup with a trembling hand. Then the IT director walked in. Torres. A Marine Corps veteran with a scar running down his left cheekbone and the kind of bearing that didn't require a uniform to announce itself. He placed a tablet on the conference table and rotated it toward Hargrove without a word. At 1400 hours yesterday, Dr. Hargrove accessed the server room using his administrative credentials, Torres said. His voice was steady, factual, relentless. He attempted to delete security footage from the lobby incident. I preserved it in triplicate and reported the tampering to hospital legal and the state medical board. The video played. Hargrove screaming. Megan moving with terrifying fluid precision, a catheter in her hand, her voice steady. The patient's chest hissing as his lungs re-inflated. O2 climbing. The desperate authority in every gesture. Hargrove watched his own voice, his own panic, play back to the room. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Torres swiped to a second file. I also found evidence Dr. Hargrove manipulated patient complaint records. He backdated grievances to match Senior Chief O'Brien's shifts. He falsified chart review timestamps going back 6 months. The hospital attorney, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses hanging from a chain, began making notes with the intensity of someone documenting a crime scene. He also contacted her nursing school under false pretenses. Torres continued, attempting to access protected educational records without authorization. That's a FERPA violation. Federal offense. The FBI liaison made a note in her own pad. Hargrove finally found his voice. She undermined my authority in front of residents. She contradicted my dosage calculations. She's a threat to the chain of command, to patient safety, too. Commander Reese laughed. Sharp. Bark-like. Chain of command? Senior Chief O'Brien held rank over every enlisted soldier in that perimeter. She was the ranking medical officer. She coordinated combat medics under mortar fire and made split-second decisions that kept men alive. You're threatened because she's more competent than you'll ever be. The words landed like a salute. Torres nodded once, almost imperceptibly. The hospital attorney slid a termination packet across the table. It was thin. 2 pages. Professional. Final. Effective immediately, she said. Your hospital privileges are revoked. You're also being referred to the Colorado Medical Board for review of potential ethics violations. Hargrove's hands began to shake. Not from fear. From the understanding that was flooding through him like cold water. His network. His board connections. His favors with the 2 radiologists who owed him referrals. His relationship with the hospital's former CFO. None of it mattered now. All of it had just become irrelevant. He was looking at professional destruction and possible criminal charges for tampering with evidence and federal record fraud. He stood, knocking his chair backward. It clattered against the floor with a sound like breaking glass. He left without saying another word. The CEO turned to Megan, who was standing near the doorway with her daughter beside her, one hand resting on the back of her chair. Senior Chief O'Brien, she said, and the title hung in the air like a formal salute. We owe you an apology that words cannot possibly convey. Megan nodded once. That was all. Her daughter squeezed her hand. 6 months passed like a breath held too long. Sacred Heart's main atrium had been transformed. Pale blue ribbons hung from the vaulted ceiling. White lights traced the perimeter. 200 people stood or sat in arranged rows, nurses in white coats, doctors in their dress clothes, hospital staff who'd worked beside Megan for 3 years without knowing who she was. In the back row, Torres stood in his dress blues. Commander Reese was there, alongside 11 other veterans from the Baghdad operation, combat medics, special forces officers, and Navy corpsmen whose life Megan had saved by packing his femoral artery wound with hemostatic gauze while rounds impacted the wall behind her. Megan stood on the small stage in her dress uniform for the first time since 2006. The navy dress blues fit like they'd been waiting for her. Her ribbons were arranged in descending order of honor. The Navy Cross. 2 silver stars. The Purple Heart. Below those, the commendation she'd earned in the years after, when she was still technically alive, before the records were erased and she became a ghost. Her daughter stood beside her in a formal dress, dark eyes wide, finally understanding the faded Special Forces unit patch that had hung framed on their living room wall for the past 3 months. The patch showed the insignia of the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, a dark horse, which had been sewn inside the jacket lining for 18 years. Megan had never explained it. Her daughter had never asked. Now she understood. The patient from the lobby was there, fully recovered. He wore a button-down shirt and looked like someone who'd been given a second life and was still learning how to breathe it. The former insurgent fighter appeared via video call from a refugee resettlement program in Michigan, tears streaming down his face. He waved at Megan with both hands, unable to speak, just shaking his head in disbelief that she was alive and real and standing in the light. The hospital CEO stepped to the microphone. Today, Sacred Heart recognizes a member of our nursing staff for extraordinary service. Not just to our patients. Not just to this hospital. But to our nation. She paused. The room held its breath. Senior Chief Petty Officer Megan O'Brien has demonstrated courage, medical excellence, and leadership under conditions that most of us cannot imagine. She has served her country with honor. And then she continued serving, without recognition, without accolades, without asking for anything in return, every single day in these hallways. The applause began softly and built like a wave. Megan's jaw remained steady. Her eyes stayed level. The voice that had whispered in the break room, that had asked forgiveness in room 512, that had accepted humiliation in silence, that voice was gone. In its place was something clearer. Steadier. Built from steel and shaped by survival. I'd like to invite Senior Chief O'Brien to say a few words, the CEO said, stepping back. Megan moved to the microphone. Her footsteps echoed across the stage. Her daughter reached for her hand but didn't hold it, just let their fingers brush for a moment. I did what I was trained to do, Megan said. Her voice filled the atrium like a command. I've never stopped doing it. Every patient deserves someone who won't quit. That's the only protocol that matters. For sentences. That was all. No explanation. No apology. No request for understanding. The room erupted. The applause thundered upward. Her daughter wrapped her arms around her mother, and for the first time in 18 years, Megan allowed herself to be held without restraint. Torres saluted from the back row with a crisp, clean military gesture. Reese nodded with something that looked like pride. The veterans from Baghdad were on their feet. The combat medic who'd survived because of her was crying openly, clapping with both hands pressed together like a prayer. A reporter from Channel 7 moved forward with a microphone. Senior Chief O'Brien, what would you like people to know about nurses who are veterans? Megan paused. She looked at the camera, then at her daughter, then back. Sometimes the bravest warriors carry stethoscopes, not guns. The final shot of the news coverage showed Megan walking out of Sacred Heart at the end of her shift, back in her regular scrubs now, her daughter waiting by the car. The jacket with the unit patch was folded over her arm, no longer hidden, no longer a secret. She was no longer a ghost moving through hallways, invisible and alone. She was home. She was seen. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your value, if you've ever survived something you thought would destroy you, subscribe to see more stories like Megan's. Like. Comment. Tell us your story.